Welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho, and joining me on Shaka Extra Time is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Hugely terrific.
Well, a big welcome to all our Facebook followers watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a place where we get to ask questions and answer some of those questions. But before we start, on a programming note, Shaka Extra Time is going on the road. We are coming to you. Our audience will be in Congo next week, and the following week will be in Zambia. The third week will be in Tanzania. Okay, Shaka, let's start in Kenya.
But before we go to Kenya,
Yeah.
Paul, what about the fact that you are actually saying that Shaka Extra Time is actually going on the road?
It's huge. It's a terrific thing. I think people need to see you, people need to hear from you, and that's why we are taking this show on the road.
And so the first stop, of course, is going to be the DRC capital, Kinshasa. We're probably going to get an opportunity, in fact, to visit Matonge, the cultural epicenter of the Democratic Republic of Congo.
In other words, interact with real people.
Real people, Paul. And then, of course, we move on from there and we actually go to Lusaka, the Zambian capital, where we'll be having an opportunity, for example, to interact with the founding president of the Republic, Dr. David Kenneth Kaunda himself, a great man. And of course, another great man, Rupia Banda, the fourth Zambian president. The two have something very interesting to talk about, especially in the African context.
And you also have an opportunity to talk to the students at the University of Zambia.
I can't wait for that. But before going to the student of Zambia, let me talk about the two great former Zambian presidents, the founding president and the fourth president. They have one thing in common, something that is very rare in Africa. These are two individuals who organized the elections, lost these elections, had the courage and the confidence and the pride of conceding defeat with grace because the Zambian people had spoken. And therefore, they decided that Zambia and Zambians were greater than themselves as individuals or their interests, really. So these are great people, and you and I, frankly, will be uniquely privileged and honored to breathe the same air with them.
Speaking about elections, Kenyans went to the polls today. From what I've been reading, it looks like there were droves and droves of people came out to vote. Do those votes count? It's too early to tell, but give me your assessment.
I don't know whether those votes will count or not count because I am not a prophet. I'm going to have to wait for the facts, wait for the appropriate institutions, for example, to release the results, wait for the media in Kenya and for some of the key players to make some comments about what is happening and not happening. But what is important, frankly, I've been encouraged by the democratic process in Kenya. If you look at Kenya in the context of the region, Paul, and I'm talking, frankly, from Cairo, pretty much to Johannesburg, really. And then you think about the Great Lakes region and what have you. Kenya seems to be playing in a different league. At least they had very good campaigns. These were not, by any standard, what you would refer to as military political operations. These were political campaigns, just like you have here in the United States, just like you have in mature democracies. So I think there is hope. Let's wait and see what happens.
A lot of speculators are saying that for the first times Kenyans have a stake in these elections. They think whether it goes the opposition way or the incumbent side, still Kenya is going to remain standing. Is that what you gather on the ground? Because previously they've had post-election violence, but this time around I think people have said no violence after the elections.
That, I think, depends from the manner and way in which the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, the IEBC, conducts itself, how it delivers its mandate. Is it in fact going to go beyond simply talking the talk and actually walk the talk by delivering an election that is perceived by the vast majority of the Kenyans as being free, fair, credible, and transparent? If that happens, I don't think that you're going to see any sign or anything about violence.
Yeah, earlier I saw the former Ghanaian President John Dramani Mahama and former U.S. Secretary of State John Kelly, who's representing the Carter Center. Mahama, I think, is leading the AAU Observer Mission, the Commonwealth. And both of them seem to be on the same page. They, at least from what they have seen, they haven't seen anything that would be characterized as something improper taking place during the election process. Is that what you think is happening on the ground? Do you have anything different that you've gathered so far?
There could be more than meets the eye, because I have seen reports suggesting, for example, that in some of the key opposition strongholds, there are polls which were opened a little bit late. As a matter of fact, the IEBC has taken action. They have fired 3 of their employees because, one, they opened actually their polling stations a bit late. And they also had something to do with some other elements of what they were supposed to be doing, and they actually did it wrong, so they were fired. But there are other places where I am told there are technical problems. And these technical problems, for some strange reason, only appear to be happening in what otherwise are known as opposition strongholds. So there are some suspicions that something might be going on, because the election is...
But do you have any evidence?
Well, I'm simply saying there are some complaints, some concerns I have seen which are being raised. And to be very honest with you, this is supposed to be a technological sort of election. Transmissions are supposed to be technical. We are not supposed to be seeing some kind of appearance or semblance of manual kind of voting, because that is where the power that be or the establishment normally takes advantage of rigging, because that's where, in fact, they come up with stuffed ballot boxes, pre-ticked, and present them as a reflection of the people who came to vote.
But even here, one could argue that even here in the United States, where you have access to internet, where things are almost perfect on election day, we have technical issues.
Yeah, but they don't. Yeah, you are absolutely correct that technical issues are not limited to Kenya. They are, in fact, universal. Okay. The question is, when here that kind of situation occurs, I don't think that you are concerned about whether or not they are occurring in, for example, strongholds of a particular candidate or a particular stronghold of a particular party. This is why we had problems in 2000 when they talked about Florida. People don't tell you that, yes, the Independent Electoral Commission in Florida is independent, but let's face it, the governor of the state of Florida at that time happened to be Jeb Bush, who happened to be a younger brother of George W. Bush, who was competing for the presidency. And eventually, you know what happened about Florida. And without Florida, he could never have been president of the United States. And it happened. So, my friend, there is something they talk about rigging. They even talk about the 1960 elections, which brought young, charismatic Bostonian John Fitzgerald Kennedy into the White House, beating the former Vice President Richard Nixon. They talk about Mayor Daley of Chicago. he seemed to have actually had something to do with it, because the results were simply too close to call.
Shaka, before we go to the comments, what makes this Kenyan election very, very significant?
I think, frankly, to me, I'm looking at this is the 5th election, for example, since the restoration of the multi-party democracy in Kenya. And I happen to have had the privilege, by the way, of covering the first multi-party election in 1992, when Moi actually retained the presidency, not by, in fact, winning, really, except that he was helped by the fact that several different political players wanted to be occupants of State House Nairobi. And so they pretty much crowned Moi to be president. Because if you actually added their votes, they formed a majority. If they had been together like Raila is now with the other colleagues of his, they would have actually defeated Moi back in 1992. And I'm talking about the old man who happens to be the father of the current major opposition leader, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. I am talking about a former Kenyan cabinet minister and a very wealthy man and very enterprising businessman, Kenneth Matiba. I am talking about a man who at one time had been vice president and later, of course, became president in 2002 because one Raila Odinga said, Kibaki Tosha. I am talking about these guys, if they had come together, they would have beaten Moi, but they couldn't. So in this particular case, it's a totally different ball game because you have all these major political interests coming together, which almost gives you a sense of the rest of Kenya actually competing against the Kikuyu establishment. And I'm talking about the establishment, not against the Kikuyu, because ordinary Kikuyus, frankly, do not even benefit out of the Kikuyu or the so-called Kikuyu establishment. And so it remains to be seen, for example, whether this time around the opposition makes some inroads in central region, which is the home, of course, region of the Kikuyu, the Meru, and the Embu. I have reports, for example, suggesting that the opposition may have made inroads in Meru. So we'll see how whether the results, in fact, reflect that. Then we have seen in the Rift Valley, the home, of course, of Deputy President William Ruto. He comes from Eldoret. But it seems to me that the opposition also has made inroads there because there is a governor there who happened to be Jubilee, but he actually endorsed Raila Odinga and NASA. Then you have Governor Isaac Ruto from Bomet, a man, by the way, who is very charismatic, a keepsigis, and is actually seen as a spokesperson of that. So who knows? And then, of course, you have Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka, the man from the Cumberland. So let's face it.
Yeah, but making inroads doesn't amount to votes at the end of the day. Right?
That is very true. You are right. But again, it's a question of whether, in fact, the vote that was made is counted, because a lot of countries in Africa, they talk about we hold periodic elections. But I think the difference here in Kenya, they have to, in a sense, prove and demonstrate that they not only hold periodic election after every 5 years, but in fact they hold a quality election.
Speaking of periodic elections, there was another election in Rwanda. To some critics, they say this was more of a coronation of King Kagame, not President Kagame, but King Kagame. And I was joking earlier and with one of my friends, Facebook friends, who said that if President Kagame was a student, he would be a remarkably smart student, because he won the election by almost 100%. That would be an A++.
He would be a genius. And politically, I think that he probably has proven that he is. But he also has company. especially in Equatorial Guinea. A man called Theodore Obiang Basongo, the last time I checked, he also actually won an election by 98%. And he also, interestingly, happens in fact, his country has a 7-year term, just like Kigali. So it's very interesting. Those would be like political geniuses in a political science classroom somewhere, especially, of course, if in fact they were also determining or deciding who should be their professor and what kind of books they should read and what types of exams they should take.
Yeah, let's go to comments or still on kingship. Let's go to Eric Kamau Mao from Tanzania. Why are most African leaders adopting kingship system, and we can never have in Africa a true and fair election?
Well, first of all, I don't know exactly what he means by adopting kingship. Is he talking about perhaps the fact that they have no term limits?
Maybe he's referring to Rwanda or any other country. It could be Rwanda, it could be Uganda,
it could be probably Angola,
yeah.
It could be probably Cameroon, it could be Sudan, it could probably be Equatorial Guinea. There are lots of places actually where you can go. But you know, I don't honestly think that introducing kingship, I think these individuals are taking advantage perhaps of the ignorance of their people. Because you know, dictatorship and that type of behavior tends to work in places where the degree of exposure of social, political awareness is very, very low. The degree of education is very low. But when you look at Kenya, for example, they are one of those few countries which are where they have very, very highly educated individuals. A lot of people are very urbanized. They are very, very aware of what happens. People talk about and accuse them to play their politics along ethnic lines as if, in fact, they are the only ones who do that. That happens to be true also here, because in America, when there is an election, you hear the black vote. You hear the Irish Catholic vote. You hear the Jewish vote, the women's vote. These are tribes, frankly, in another way, in another context. In Kenya, there are actually some people are beginning to move away from the traditional tribal type of loyalty, because they realize that if, for example, a Kikuyu, just an example, if a Kikuyu actually is stealing, for example, they realize that that person does not actually share his or her loot with his or her fellow Kikuyu. He basically shares it with his family and friends. But when he or she gets caught, guess what? She actually, or he says, you know, they are doing this to me because I'm a Kikuyu. And so people actually run around them. But for people who are very highly urbanized, they are also normally affected by the economic situation. And you know, there is a saying that no politics supersedes the politics of the stomach. And so you have the Uunga revolution perhaps in play, because the price of unga, we're talking about maize, which is called corn here,
has gone through the roof.
Precisely. And you talk about milk, which is very essential for young babies really growing up. And the incumbent president, Uhuru Kenyatta, and his family happen to control the single largest dairy industry in the country.
Not only in the country, even perhaps in the region, because Brookside owns like 75% of the shares in the in Uganda.
There you are. And in fact, they also be experiencing recently some problems with Tanzania, because they actually also do business in Tanzania. So maybe some of these people whose kids cannot have unfettered access to milk because it is simply too expensive, they may decide at the ballot box today, they may have decided to vote against the incumbent just because of that. And if that were to be true, then it is very interesting and very important, because politics is about really something that, helps you, because people actually pay, they vote for their checkbook, not for their religion, not for their clan, not for somebody's beauty or tallness or shortness, even though some of those attributes sometimes can actually attract some votes.
Shaka, you touched something that I wanted to go back to, and maybe let me go to a comment here. You talked about tribalism. Osenowu Njay from Gambia asks, what are the factors that encourage tribalism in an African election?
Well, I would tell the Osene from the Gambia.
Yes.
I think that's to do with, first and foremost, ignorance. It takes an individual who is very ignorant, who is very insecure in terms of competing against with the people who represent different orientations and what have you, not capable of competing and being the best that they can become, to take advantage of that kind of tradition, because you're talking about relationships here which are based on blood. And you normally see those things happening in situations where the majority of the citizens do not even think they have citizenship rights, or people do not feel that they are actually citizens. Because if you are citizens, it means that you owe allegiance to the state, and in the process, it means that in fact, you are a citizen because you have constitutional rights, or you could even say inalienable rights, which is pretty much like saying birthrights. And therefore, you are the sovereign. You are the power. You are part of the people that make what power is. Whereas if you are in a dictatorship, or you are in a situation where there is a king and what have you, you owe your allegiance to an individual authority. And if you owe your allegiance to an individual authority or power, it means that you are not entitled to constitutional rights, or you are not entitled to birthrights. You are in fact entitled to privileges which have to be granted to you by that individual authority. And so tribalism, works very, very well where people are very ignorant. And the only way they can survive is through what you would call social political patronage. You do not have to have skill sets, really, that can help you to contribute or to make a contribution. All you have to do is to speak the same language like the guy who happens to be in charge of that particular community, or through blood or through marriage, and you are in business. But in most cases, those types of societies, by the way, do not really work. They are not developed.
Yeah. Let's go to another interesting comment from Kelvin Smith in Liberia. He says, Shaka, I've come to realize that the so-called leaders in Africa lack patriotism, which leads to dishonesty, disrespect for their people. What can actually be done to curtail that?
It's very interesting. Kevin is raising a very interesting point here. And I would say, frankly, that, I would say the answer is yes and no. Yes, because they have a certain type of patriotism, which is something that, could be characterized as being patriotic to their stomachs, the stomachs of their families, their immediate friends, not patriotic to their community, to their society, to their people, to their country. But in fact, what is needed is the reverse, to be patriotic to society, to the country. Because after all, if you are a politician, you have been, you've gotten to that position because you claim that you have actually been elected, you have been voted into that office, but your mandate, frankly, is supposed to be making sure that you come up with policies, or you are part of making decisions that benefit the people who sent you into that office.
We have time for one more comment. Let's go to Zambia. Chalaba Mulenga in Zambia says he's looking forward to your interaction with the students at the University of Zambia. But he asks, does democracy exist in Africa, or it's just a lip service and not practiced?
Well, to be honest with you, there are some places on the African continent where democracy is practiced. But he's also equally correct that in the majority of countries that make up the African Union, and we're talking about 54 countries, I can hardly get 15 countries. For example, there is democracy in South Africa. There's no question about it. There's democracy in Ghana. There's democracy in Namibia, Botswana, and I can go on and go on about 15 countries. So long as that democracy is a reflection of the needs and the concerns of the people. And we're talking about a government of the people, by the people, for the people, as described, of course, defined by a one great American president, Abraham Lincoln. We should not talk about democracy that is defined like a government of some people or some individuals, by some people or by some individuals, and for some people, and or for some individuals, like obtains in a lot of African countries.
Well, that's a good segue to maybe to talk about what you're going to be doing tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa.
Well, tomorrow we're going to look, of course, at results of the last election. Some would call it selection, others will call it coronation in Rwanda, and the election in Kenya, and find out whether those processes were free, fair, credible and transparent, and what they hold for the future of their two respective and different countries.
Very briefly, talk about your upcoming trip to Africa.
I'm very excited. We're going to be going to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We hope to be in Kinshasa on Sunday, and we'll be there for a week, and after that we hope, of course, to meet with President Joseph Kabila and others. And from there, we go to Lusaka, then from Lusaka to Tanzania, Zanzibar, and then back to Washington.
Well, on that note, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to interacting with you on the continent, and maybe we can get a more real people on the continent asking you questions.
The feeling is mutual, my brother.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Good luck, and have a pleasant trip.
Thank you.
Okay, came in about 28.50.
28.50.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He was very cautious here.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Thank you.
That works better.
Yeah.
That works better
Yeah.
than the last time I did it, where I wasn't sure.
Uh-huh.
You know, I got the,
Yeah.
yeah, that's fine. That's good.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you,
Yeah.
gentlemen. I wish you both.
Thank you very much.
Speed and
Thank you.
good luck.
Thank you, Jeff.
All my friends,
Yeah,
guys,
thank you.
and good luck.
So no, I just going to.
And you mentioned
No, I just.